Hello and welcome to the Sales Code Leadership Podcast with Kevin Teeler and my guest this week, Charlene Li. Charlene, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
Lovely. Well, it's nice to see you. You are a digital transformation and disruptive leadership expert and the author of The Disruptive Mindset, which is a fascinating topic we're going to dive into today.
Fantastic. Looking forward to it.
Excellent. Well, let's get cracking. Before we do, though, just perhaps you can just give us a kind of a brief overview of what is it you get paid to do today? How does all this wrap up into work for clients?
Well, I basically do three things. I do speaking. So at conferences, user conferences, executive workshops, employee meetings. I also do a little bit of advisory and consulting. And then it's mostly coaching, also getting into the executive coaching, especially of fantastic leaders who really want to move into that transformational space. And on the side, I sit on a few boards too as well.
It sounds like you've got quite a lot on your plate.
It's fun. It all wraps up into this being a catalyst for transformation, which is what I love being.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Well, that's something which is really interesting to our listener because in the tech space, obviously, a lot of it is about transformation, isn't it? I'm guessing I'm sure you can't disclose names of people that you work with, but you must do a bit of work in the tech space, do you?
I do. I was a Forrester analyst for 10 years. So I'm very familiar with tech. It is the foundation of all I do. But I try to put technology in the context of business strategy and leadership, because technology in of its own is not that interesting. It's how it's being used to create change and impact that I'm really interested in.
Completely. We're also going to drill into artificial intelligence, AI, today. I know that's a hot topic for you, and obviously it's very interesting for the people on the podcast. But before we get to that point, I'm kind of fascinated about how you got to where you are now. Is this the career that you remotely had in mind when you were 16, Charlene?
Oh, absolutely not. I thought for sure I was going to be a doctor.
Oh,
I
really?
thought I was going to go and be, my father's a doctor. Everyone in my family is in the medical or engineering space. So I'm definitely the black sheep in the family.
Right.
So if any of the nephews or cousins are thinking about business, they will send them to Auntie Charlene to talk about, because there's no one else in the family who does it.
Everyone else is a professional outside of business, effectively.
Exactly.
Right.
So I came out of business school, and it was in 1993, and the internet was just beginning, and I could see that this was going to be a hugely transformational force. So I decided to eschew investment banking, consulting, which is what most people were going into, and I went into newspapers, and specifically the San Jose Mercury News, because I did some analysis. This is what I like to do, and realized that newspapers were going to be impacted very, very quickly. And I wanted to be at the front edge of that disruption and in Silicon Valley where everything was happening. So I got very lucky. I got into a space that was changing literally overnight. Became a newspaper publisher, did that for about 5 years and 7 years, and then had babies, got married, and decided to go be an analyst for a couple of years at Forrester and covered the dot-com boom, sized the internet, covered search, started writing about social media, and then digital transformation. And along the way, I started my own analyst firm, was very disruptive in its business model, and then sold that in 2015. So I have a nice little exit from my startup, and then have been researching and writing ever since for various companies, and recently just went independent completely, fully on my own again, and loving the independence and the freedom to look at these new technologies and transformations.
You've packed quite a bit in the past 30 years, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So when I see disruption happening, I tend to run towards it, not away from it.
That's quite unusual, isn't it? Do you think that that's an irregular kind of way of looking at the world?
It's definitely not regular, because I can tell you that from my professional and personal life. But just to give you an idea, I'm Asian American woman. I grew up in Detroit. I'm the daughter of immigrants. And so right from the very beginning, didn't fit in. And so when you're a walking disruption just by being in the room, you get kind of used to it.
Yeah.
And so I've made having disruptions and change, and I have a little model that every day I'm going to seek out some sort of adventure that I can learn from. And if I can't find it, I'll go create it. And so I find that disruptions and changes, adventures are really invigorating. I learn from them, and I seek that out actively. So if I'm not feeling a little uncomfortable every day, I'm like, oh, I need to go find that, because it makes life just really interesting and exciting for me.
Well, I know it's the beginning of your day because you're in San Francisco, aren't you?
That's right.
But can you tell us about one of the adventures you've had this week? Is there anything you can share with us?
Sure. One of the things I just did yesterday was to go shopping with a friend of mine for some clothes in this little area called the Haight Ashbury. And so and you never know what you're going to find. And so he was looking for something a little different for a party. I said, okay, I'll go and help him look for something. And just exploring and digging through racks of clothes, you find the most interesting and unusual things. So I didn't look for anything. I wasn't looking for anything, but in particular, found some very interesting things. We were holding up and going, "What is this? How would you wear it?" So just trying them on for fun, and just doing those kind of fun things, and looking for unusual things out of the ordinary is just a fun thing to be able to do for a change.
Is it something like a beginner's mindset as well? Is that the sort of...
It is very much so. I feel like I'm constantly learning, and especially with all this new technology every day. Was recently playing with some deep fakes. I was presenting to a group of Japanese executives, and I thought it might be interesting to show them some of my deep fake experiments. So I took a recording of myself, used it to generate voice snippets. It created a script, translated into Japanese, had myself speaking with my voice in Japanese. Obviously, I don't speak Japanese. And then took a headshot and put my Japanese voice onto that headshot and animated it, and created a deep fake of myself presenting about the power of AI to a group of Japanese executives so that they could actually understand in their native language. So incredibly powerful technology, but at the same time, absolutely terrifying, because anybody can take a podcast of my voice, a 5-minute snippet, an existing headshot, and make a deep fake of myself.
Yeah, you can see the potential for that to be, if it falls into the wrong hands, to be used in a very unhelpful, quite dangerous way, can't you?
Yeah, but think about it. The Star Trek Universal Translator is here literally at our fingertips, that I can take an entire speech and have an avatar of myself speak it and deliver it in whatever language with my voice, with my image. And that opens up the possibilities for engagement for me in my business, because I do primarily speaking. And right now it's to primarily English speaking audiences. But I have that same video now in Japanese and Chinese and German and Bulgarian, because my co-author is Bulgarian and I want her to hear it. Me speaking Bulgarian.
Well, you're talking my language, because you're talking to someone who I grew up watching Star Trek on the TV, and I always thought I still love that program and every version of it, including the first one, because it paints a really optimistic view of the future and our ability to get there. And there's an enormous amount of diversity in Star Trek, isn't there? And a very positive, optimistic outlook, which I think is where I want to go with this call today. There's a lot of doom and gloom in the world at the moment, isn't there? And we can't ignore that. But I mean, there's actually a lot of doom and gloom about AI destroying jobs, destroying livelihoods, altering election outcomes, potentially, all that kind of stuff, right? But I like you. I'm an optimist, I think, and I like disruption as well. So I think we're on the same page together. We'll try and mostly keep it pointed in that direction. Let's go to the future in an exciting way with Charlene Li. Now, this definitely is the real Charlene Li we're talking to.
Yes. Definitely me here. I'm pinching myself. I can definitely assure you that this is actually me.
I'm pleased to hear that. So why don't we take a dive into leadership, which is a special topic for you because you're an expert on it. And as you say, you actually coach a lot of very high profile leaders as well.
Yes.
And can we give that maybe a bit of a flavor of AI? So if I ask you what is leadership for you? That's the first question.
Well, leadership is definitely not a title. So you don't have to have a title to be a leader. It's really a mindset. And I define leadership as a relationship between people who aspire to create change and people who are inspired to follow them. So you're a leader if you're trying to create change. You see that something needs to be done differently, and you start doing that, and you convince other people to come to the cause too as well. That's the definition of a leader. And if you're not creating change, that's fine. You're a manager. You're a manager of the status quo, which is fine. But leaders hold a very special place in our world. They inspire, they see the change when nobody else can see it. They step into that void, make it happen, and get people to come to that cause and to help make that change happen.
I think you write about the four archetypes of disruptive leadership, don't you? Could you help us to understand what they are?
Sure. I did some research all around the world, surveyed thousands of leaders, and found four archetypes. And every organization has these four archetypes because they just by nature suss them out this way. The first one is the realist optimist. And these are the real change makers. They are very open in terms of their willingness to change. They have an open mindset to that. And they also have the leadership behaviors to make things happen, to bring people in, and to again, inspire people and to execute. And I think that optimism that we talked about before is so important, but you also need to be realistic, because if you're not, then you set these goals that are unachievable. You don't show a path forward. Just say we should go and do something, but not how. The antithesis of that is what I call the agent provocateur. These are a lot of my friends here at Silicon Valley. They get up on stage and wave their hands and they go, disrupt or die. And they walk off the stage and think that everything's going to just happen. So that's a very small percentage of people. And realist optimists are typically between 20 and 25% of an organization. The steady managers just get things done, but they're not necessarily seeking out change. They represent about 50% of the population of leaders. And then the worried skeptic is my favorite. They really don't like to change, and they're kind of more individual contributors. And they're very special because you can only go as fast as your slowest worried skeptic. So you need to bring them along. If they are aligned with what you are trying to do, they believe in what you are trying to do and making this change happen, then it's a question of how fast, how comfortable they are, and they probably see something that you don't. So have them be on the risk mitigation team. Have them think about all the things that could go wrong, because they may be seeing something that you don't. But if they do not believe in the change, then you have to have a different conversation to say, is this the right place for you? This is the right place where you can pull your full energy behind what we're trying to do here, the change you want to create. Because if we don't believe in the change, then we need to find a place where you are comfortable with that change.
Is there a sort of is kind of a contradiction in some extent? If you've got a disruptive mindset, you could cause trouble within a company, couldn't you, if you weren't aligned with the goals specifically, or you weren't in the right role? So those roles all need to be, well, those types need to be in roles that suit their profile.
Right. And the tough part, because I talk to so many disruptors, they say, I can see what we have to go do. I can see the path forward, but my leaders don't. How do I convince them? And the reality is leaders are really good at what they do because they focus on the top 3 things they have to get done. And it's just 3. They may have 7, but it's really just 3. So whatever change you want to propose have to align with those 3 goals. Or it has to be such a compelling change, it's going to displace one of those 3 goals. That's the only way around it. So if the change that you're proposing isn't going to impact those 3 goals, then that leader's not going to pay. They're not going to care and not going to pay attention. And then you have to say, well, am I in the right place then to be doing this? If is this the right place where the change I believe needs to happen in the world is not going to happen, then I need to take my talents and efforts someplace else and exercise what I call the power of 2 feet and walk to a place where you can put your talents to work, to put all that effort, that ingenuity to work.
I think the tech sector specifically, so you've worked in for a long time, I've worked in for 30 years, has always been, the successful companies have always been disruptive, haven't they, to a degree? And I'm seeing now, I think, obviously the internet, as you say, you came into the industry about the time that was really taking off, was in itself a very disruptive capability. Do you think that AI is going to be even more disruptive than what we've seen over the past 20 years since the internet applications and Salesforce came along with other, SaaS-based applications and stuff?
I think it's going to be much more disruptive for a couple reasons. First of all, it's happening so quickly. It is available and usable to anybody with a browser. You don't need a centralized IT team to deploy it into the organization. Everyone just has it. And so it's not very controllable, which is a really hard thing for organizations because we like technology that's controllable and manageable and you could turn on and off and handle the permissions for. You can't do that with generative AI because anybody can use it. And so the speed of adoption, the ease of adoption, but also the impact. There's so much research that says that it's not so much replacing jobs as it is enhancing jobs and reducing the mundane and tedious aspects of our work. It's making work enjoyable again. So if you can get rid of all the mundane things you have to do and actually become much more productive, it's less about how can the leaders I think in this space are thinking not so much how do I take those savings and push it to the bottom line. The really smart ones are saying, how do I take that energy, harness it, take the bottom performers, make them our top performers, and scale everybody into creating new products and services to create our competitive advantage, to supercharge our growth with no additional time, money, and people. We've never had that opportunity before at this level of scale, not this quickly, not this broadly across the entire organization. So that's why I think it's going to be so transformative. If you can look at this technology in a much more strategic way than something that's just done on a piecemeal basis.
How's it going to take the bottom performers to the top performers? How's that going to work?
Well, you think about in a call center, the onboarding time for somebody to learn the lingo, all the ins and outs of an organization, how the products work, all the different types of customers. It's a lot of information. And so when you begin a job, you're pretty much a novice and you're not very good, and it takes a long time to ramp. What we're seeing now is it takes those bottom performers and gets them up to speed much faster, and they're able to do the jobs much better than they ever could before. And so you don't need to have as many people. You can have more people doing things at a better level. Customer experience across the board, from support to sales to marketing, is fundamentally being changed because of this generative AI. It's great at understanding who that customer is and delivering exactly what it is at that moment that they need. We just don't have brains and systems fast enough in our people to be able to do this. But having a human in the loop, not just offloading it to an automated bot, makes that combination just so much better and effective. In some cases, you can automate it, but in most cases right now, it's really about elevating that human.
Yeah, and so let's talk a little bit more about that then. What are going to be the human skills that are going to be much in demand in the next 10 years?
Well, we talk about critical thinking, the ability to look at a situation from multiple directions. So in the past, we really highly valued people who could follow instructions to the T without deviation. That's what we really wanted people to do. We wanted them to be programs. But what's going to be much more in demand is the ability to take an unknown situation and be able to figure out the solution, that critical thinking, without having to go ask somebody. And that changes then the roles of managers and leaders, because instead of being the person who has a solution for somebody who doesn't know how to look for the answer, you're training people and giving people the capacity to look for answers themselves. You become a facilitator rather than somebody who's making sure everybody does the same thing all the time, the same way.
So if you're a new starter, I'm just thinking like sales, which is obviously the most of the people that listen to this podcast are in sales in the tech sector. It could be a great way of sort of speeding up the ramp time, or decreasing, I should say, the ramp time for new hires, because they can go and design their own learning journey and figure out what they need pretty quickly. Is that a good example?
It's absolutely, because right now all of our onboarding and training, and this is with jobs in general, but education, it's going down to the lowest common denominator. So you make sure everybody can do everything. And so if you're pretty skilled, you're bored. If you're not that skilled, you're just confused. And so if we can play to people's strengths and use their strengths to help them understand all the places where they are not so strong, shore up those areas. But you can use generative AI to say, like, I know you are a great hearing, you're auditory listener. So I'm going to present a lot of the stuff to you auditory wise versus a person who's visual learner or somebody who's an experiential learner. I can learn in 3 different ways now. That's according to my learning style, how I best ingest and retain information. So like simple writing, right? Writing sales proposals. If there's a certain format, why make me do it from scratch? Give me a template. Let me fill in the parameters. It'll just do it, and it'll do it in my voice because it has understood how I communicate and do things. It'll just learn my voice. Having me do the sales analysis to be able to figure out which contacts to go and contact. I don't know anybody who loves working in their CRM. Everybody, you have to do it. It is a chore. What if working in the CRM is as intuitive as just speaking, as being able to talk and just say,
like we're doing now, having a conversation effectively.
Right.
So you have a conversation with your CRM system.
Exactly. And the interface becomes less of an importance. And this is a real concern for a lot of the enterprise players because it's less about how the interface is laid out and the functionality underneath just becomes much more intuitive. And it's more about how quickly can I get you to the information that you need? How quickly can I intuit the fact that you need this information to do your job? Because this is the most natural next best action you should be taking on behalf of your customers and prospects. We've never had that. I mean, it's like having a sales coach sitting behind you constantly all the time saying, hey, I noticed you're doing this. Here's another way to do it. Here's a suggestion on some other things you could be looking at. You haven't talked to these 18 people in 6 months. And by the way, they're talking about these things on their LinkedIn profile, so you can use that to initiate. And here's an email that you can send.
Wow. Sounds fantastic, Charlene. It really does.
I mean,
is that possible really now, though? How close are we to this
well,
dream?
I'll tell you, I have a really basic CRM. And I use it to track the contents of things that people are saying. I just have a couple plugins that go into it. And so I have a reminder to go look at that. I can see their social media profiles, the latest content. I ask my AI engine to go look at that profile, summarize a couple points that I can make based on the things, our past conversations, and it writes me a little email. So that's kind of nice. I don't have to sit there, slog through everything. And I can just do that.
Well, let's toggle back to leadership for a while, can we? I look at leadership as having 3 dimensions. I mean, many ways of looking at leadership. I think, by the way, you're absolutely right. You're not a leader if you don't have followers. I think we can all agree on that. But as I understand it, when I'm leading sales teams, I've got 3 dimensions to look at. The first one is culture, which is about people. The second is strategy, which is about planning. And the third is execution, which is about process. Obviously, in sales, execution is the thing you want to get to as quickly as you can. But I'm interested in your views on where AI particularly and this disruptive mindset model will play into those areas. If we think about culture for a start, how will it impact culture, the people part of your business?
It's going to have a huge impact because you think about culture, it is about people, and it's about how people are going to work with each other. What are the written rules and unwritten rules of how we relate? How do we make decisions? How do we disagree? Do we have to reach consensus? How do we tell each other and give each other feedback? How do we get things done around here? How do we do things? So culture is really made up of your beliefs and the behaviors that stem from those beliefs. And you have a good culture, and there's some parts of your culture that probably aren't that great. And AI is definitely going to change our culture because if our culture in the past was you go to each other, you keep your head down, you do your job, and if there's any deviation from that, go talk to your manager. Now with AI, I know more about my job than my manager does. I can do my job better, faster than anybody expected. I can find new ways to do this. Now, will you as a manager feel comfortable letting me do that? Or do you have a strong sense of control, of locking things down, of hierarchy? Do I have permission and agency to go do these things? I like to think of generative AI as this magical wand that gives people superpowers. So, how are you going to change? How is your culture going to change when you suddenly have an employee base filled with superhumans, superheroes who could do things they never could before? And they have this power, and they're like, what do I do with this? How do I relate to that? And so you're going to have people who use this and people who don't. And that's going to create culture clashes and tensions because they're doing things in a different way. So culture, I think, is such an important part of disruptive cultures and transformations, because how well does your culture deal with flux and change and expand and can include and have these people feel like they belong, not feel like they're oddballs? Do you welcome things like this? Or do you have an immune system that stamps it out as quickly as possible? When somebody says, hey, I've got a new way of doing things, people say, oh, that's so cool, tell me about it. Or, yeah, that may be great, but that's not the way we do things around here. So that part of culture is such an important thing. The things that helped you become so strong may not be the things that carry you forward. They may be things that hold you back now. So having that constant assessment to say, do we have the culture that we want? Do we have the culture that we need? And then to make adjustments about that. And if there are beliefs that are no longer serving you, you have to stamp it out across the entire organization. One of my favorite ones is people feel like they don't have the permission to try new things. They don't even have the permission to ask if they can try new things. That is not a belief that belongs in any organization. You should always be able to ask, and that there should be some outlet for that level of inventiveness, experimentation, and ingenuity. Otherwise, you just feel like a cog in the wheel. So how do you get rid of that? How do you identify what are the behaviors? And every time it shows up, do you say, look, no, we don't believe that anymore. Instead, we believe in this new belief that says, if we have a new idea, then this is a way to express it. This is the channel for that. And we want to hear that because it's a good thing.
So human beings with superpowers are going to lead us to a new generation of companies where innovation is welcome, new ideas are encouraged.
Well, hopefully, yes. And the reality is, I think that every single person is a superhero. We just don't realize it. The interesting thing about superheroes, they don't realize that their superpower is unusual, because can't everybody see through walls? I can. It just feels like a normal everyday thing that I can do. It doesn't feel like a superpower. And so when people can understand what their superpower is, can tap into it. And sometimes it's, having a great working relationship and processes. Sometimes it's these technology that can unlock something they had never experienced before. And when they get that aha moment, it's a beautiful moment when they say, oh, I can do this. I'm like, yes, you can. You can do amazing things that you never thought were possible. Then do we have the ability to give them space? Can we hold space for them to be able to explore that, to experiment with that, to fail with that? I think that cultures that have a really healthy relationship with failure, it doesn't mean that you like to fail. It says that you put failure in the right place. You know how to fail well, how to fail safely. That you as an organization, as a leader, have defined the sphere of where you can go and experiment and try a lot of different things. And within that area, up to that very edge, you can do anything. No, not a problem. Just don't go past that edge.
It sounds a bit like psychological safety. Is that part of it?
It absolutely is psychological safety. But we don't do a good job of explaining what that is and what that looks like in very concrete terms. I like to say that leaders say, like, yeah, you're psychologically safe. Trust me, you're safe. Like, no, I'm not going to trust you. You've never demonstrated this to me before. What does it mean? How far can I go? So the most disruptive teams are when the leader takes the team right to the very edge. This is what it looks like. This is what it feels like. It should feel really scary out here. And look around. All of us are out here together. We're here to support each other, so that we should stumble or fall, we're going to pick each other up. And we're going to stay here at this edge. until it feels a little bit less edgy, and then we're going to push forward a little further. We are not going to return back to the home base of safety, but we're going to stay here at this edge, and this is what it looks like.
It's
But that
definitely
takes a lot
Star
of time.
Trek, Charlene. It's the
Yeah.
5-year mission.
Right.
Ongoing out into outer space towards more human potential.
But the thing here is that there's a clear mission. It's
Yeah.
not just exploration for the sake of exploration. There is
No.
a mission that you're going on. We're very clear on what the objectives are. You talk about execution, you talk about strategy. That absolutely has to be the case. And if you're a leader that just says, yeah, let's go out there and try lots of different things and disrupt and take risks without defining what kind of strategy, what type of transformation are we comfortable with and not comfortable with? What risks are acceptable and which ones are not? It's not about celebrating the success after you take the risk, because if you take a true risk, it very much well could also end in failure. It's about taking the risk, that first step, deciding to take the risk. And if it doesn't work out, then having the discipline to come back and say, what was it about that decision that we didn't know? What were the information pieces that we were missing? How did we not see that this could be that this was going to be the outcome and miss the success? And it's a really good exercise to do. Not blaming anybody. It wasn't that you failed. It was that the project that failed, but we did our best. And it's to recognize that and to move forward with that.
So whose responsibility in the corporation should it be to see that AI is used productively, purposefully, morally?
I believe it comes down to the executive team and the board of directors. It is that high level.
So you need to have a strategy for AI.
Absolutely.
Right? And in the same way we had a strategy for deploying the internet-based applications 20 years ago, you've got to have a strategy for AI.
If you think about the internet strategies that deployed it with just a technology without a view of how it's going to impact the business, guess what? They had to go back and redo everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, wait, here are the business sides of things. So if you treat generative AI as just a technology, I tell you, you will fail. If you treat it, first of all, the number one thing I say to people, play defense, first of all. Make sure you have the policies in place to make sure everyone knows what they can and cannot do. Understand that you're compliant with any regulatory issues that are there, especially in the EU with the AI Act. We have 30 states in the US going through various stages of this, so it's constantly changing.
It's actually, honestly, Charlene, I didn't know there was an AI Act. When did that come in?
Yeah. Oh, it's right in. It's already been approved. It's going into action next year.
Oh, so really? Oh,
like different levels.
Right.
Red, green, and yellow lights of different uses of AI.
So that's a little bit like the GDPR legislation that came in years ago.
Very much the same. Very much the same. If you're doing any business in the EU by the year 2026, you must have all of these things in place to be compliant.
And you say 30 states in America have done the same thing.
They're in the process of looking at it.
Right.
The California is probably the most advanced in terms of looking at privacy protections, as it is in general. But again, and China has a completely different set of rules.
Mm-hmm.
So you have three nexuses of things that you need to stay compliant with. So just play defense, first of all. Understand, again, these threats that are there. But then you move into the big bets and you look at your strategy. You look at your existing business strategy and say, where can generative AI make a big difference in advancing my competitive advantage? Where am I? And so one organization said, our competitive advantage comes from having a superior customer experience. We make these products, we have these services, but underlying all of this is a fantastic customer experience. And so we're going to use generative AI to shore up that competitive advantage. So looking at everything through that lens. And they also did something very, very interesting, this company. They said, and I asked, how did you begin thinking about your generative AI strategy? And they said, we started with our values. We started with the things that are most important to us. And this is what I find consistently around disruptive companies. They start with their strong culture, their strategy, their values, because those are the things that ground them in the midst of tremendous change and transformation. Because when everything is changing, there need to be some things that are just foundational. So they had a value of really valuing their people. And throughout COVID, they didn't let go of a single person. They said it was really hard. We lost a ton of money. Fortunately, we had enough cash to carry us through, but we didn't let go of a single person. And as a result, our employees are so loyal to us and dedicated to us. So they started with that value when looking at generative AI. They go, we know this is going to have tremendous changes on our workforce. We know we can save so much money, but we are not going to fire, let go of anybody, replace anybody because of this technology. Full stop. We're going to use this to enhance their jobs. We're going to use this to make their work so much better, make them more productive, find new opportunities that we can use all that talent to grow into. So that was a commitment they made right from the very beginning. And that just took off a huge amount of weight from people. They knew that their jobs were not at risk. Their jobs may change. The way they do things may change. Guaranteed it was going to change, but they knew that this was going to happen. And this is a company that was also highly unionized, and they made that commitment right from the very beginning. So I find that the organizations, especially when it comes to generative AI, which raises so many ethical and responsibility issues, we don't usually have that in business strategy or in technology. I mean, when was the last time we talked about ethics, right? When did we actually talk about values? And for companies that are value-led, value-driven, it's a very different experience because now you're starting with your values to help you make decisions.
I think there are companies that most companies talk about values on their website, but often it doesn't really go any further through the organization, does it? So
No.
Let's look at execution just for a couple of minutes, because stuff has to get done, doesn't it? How disruptive can AI be to how we execute, specifically in sales, do you think? I mean, we talked about some examples of how it may improve your performance as a salesperson by giving you, the extra special powers that you need, if you like. But just turning the lens a little bit negative for a second, what are the things to avoid, do you think? What's bad practice look like with this?
Spamming all of your customers because you can, right?
Spamming,
It is so easy.
absolutely.
It is so easy to just produce content after content after content pieces. I can take one video that I make. Again, the hardest part of a salesperson, especially with social selling, is to create content. Because you got to create content to keep people engaged.
Yeah.
But now you could potentially create endless amounts of content and personalize for every single person. Now, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I've always thought that the most beautiful thing about sales is to actually know when not to talk to somebody because you know they're good and you're comfortable in that relationship. And you don't have to be constantly pinging them and annoying them because they're all good. So how can you tell that? So the worst thing you could do is to just keep doing the things the same way we did before. It's just at a higher volume and frequency because we think that reach and frequency is going to be the answer. It's not always.
Do something different. Be creative. That's what this technology should liberate us to do, isn't it? To be more creative, to be more imaginative, to take more risks, to fail, but fail safely and quickly and try again.
And if you know that everyone has this technology, then how do you stand out? I mean, this is the thing that hit me between the eyes. I mean, I am an expert on digital transformation. And anybody now can go into ChatGPT and find exactly what I would say or any other expert would say and have all the answers right in front of them. They don't need me anymore. So and I know that 70% of the work that I do is going to be impacted, changed, replaced because of generative AI. I already am doing that. And so what's the value that I can create? And it has to be this, and again, the AI can be just as empathetic, if not more empathetic than I can. It can look past my biases. It doesn't get tired. And I'm planning on using it in my coaching so that I can be, quote, available to my coachees 24/7 or version of me through my AI. So who am I then? What value am I creating? And it is this new synthesis. It's looking at the creativity of things, putting things together, that critical thinking that the AI hasn't done yet. For me to ask the right questions to the AI, to produce the kind of content, to get the relationship I'm aiming for. Again, it's being able to harness these tools in new and different ways that, again, we're just beginning to figure it out. I know there are concerns that it's not accurate, it's not, you can't trust it. And I like to say this is the worst that technology will ever be. It is just going to get exponentially better from here. So we can complain about how it's not very good, but I think in the reality, it is pretty mind-blowingly amazing. And if we can understand what the risks are, put them into the right place, what can we do with this? How can we experiment with it? I call it the knowing, doing, leading gap. We know about it. We've probably tried it. The numbers of us who are actually doing it on a regular basis, using it regularly to do our work, is very, very little. And the gap even to leading with it, to know how to lead others, to adopt it, to use it, to change our work, to change our society, is very, very few. And I'm keen on us being able to move from just knowing as quickly as possible to doing, but then into a place where we are leading this change, seeing what's possible, and again, getting people to follow you to go and make that happen.
Well, Charlene, we've been talking a lot about the exciting future that awaits all of us out there if we take this opportunity. I'd like just to toggle back with one last question to the past, if I can get you to reflect for a minute, which is, bearing in mind all the change that you've been through over the past 30 years since you came into this sector, what's the one thing you wish you knew at the beginning of your career that you picked up along the way?
The one thing I wish I knew was how important it is to foster the personal relationships to make change happen. We talk about strategy, culture, all these things, but in the end, it is a conversation by conversation aspect of making change happen. I can remember the pivotal conversations where the transformation moved from the place of, just kind of going along to being super hyper accelerated. And there were these aha moments that you can create as a group, as individuals. So the communication aspects of transformation, how important that is, the time it takes to sit and listen, to hold space, to form that level of trust is so crucial. And we oftentimes forget that in the charge moving forward to make change happen.
Well, hopefully we've taken a chip away at that mission today, because I've learned a ton of stuff from you today, Charlene, and I know that our listener will have learned a ton of stuff as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it has. It's been really good, and it's good to talk to someone who is a optimistic technologist, if I can say that, because we're going to need people out there to believe that we can change the world for the better. We've got a whole lot of challenges, haven't we? You can just sit and reel them off. And what we have is, I'm actually, like you, a believer that technology will help us to solve those challenges. Technology and the human spirit, harness those two things.
And I so agree with that, because there's so many problems in the world that to be solved. We're not going to get there by incrementally addressing them. We need to disrupt them. Which is why I'm so passionate about disruption and transformation. And we need more leaders who are willing to stand up and take that risk, take that step forward, and to be that leader to make that change happen.
Well, let's see if we can't find a few more. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much, Charlene.
Thank you so much, too.